Sustaining Practices for Perilous Times. I'm Rabbi Jen Queen. I'm the Director of Engagement and Reform Rabbi at Harvard Hillel and one of the chaplains on campus. And I'm very excited to see you all at this week's gathering. So for those of you who've been here before, welcome back. And those for whom this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're happy to see you. So Sustaining Practices for Perilous Times is a series featuring Harvard University chaplains, faculty, administrators, and other folks from our extended Harvard community sharing insight and offering examples of their personal spiritual practices. So in this space, we define spiritual practice very broadly, and we're showcasing a diverse array of multimodal practices, anything from prayer to poetry to movement and mindfulness, cooking, other creative outlets, anything that inspires, cultivates meaning, provides emotional and spiritual sustenance, or just gives a little boost to our hope, energy, and courage to press forward during these very difficult times. And we are here every Thursday. This is actually our second to last presentation for the spring semester. So we're here this week. We'll be back next week. And we have two presenters again for you this week to give you examples of their practices and offer some resources for y'all to try at home. And so at this point, I will kick it over to Rachel.
Hi all, I'm Rachel Lycan. I'm the Multi-Faith Engagement Fellow based in Memorial Church. It's so great to see you all. I'm excited to introduce this week's presenters. We're going to be talking about music and the intersection between music and their spiritual practices. So we're so lucky to be able to learn today from Professor and Acting Dean at Harvard Divinity School, David Holland, and from David Von Baron, who's the Assistant University Organist and Choir Master in the Memorial Church. Very David day. So I'm going to pass it over now to David Von Barrett to kick us off.
Sure, thank you so much, and hi friends. It is such a joy and honor to be here today with you, and I'm grateful to Rachel and Rabbi Jen for inviting me to be here with you. It's such an honor. I'd like to talk today about the sustaining spiritual practice of praying through music today, ways I've been challenged, what this time has looked like for me, and things I've learned about prayer and music along the way, as well as opportunities I've found to get creative. So in this time, shortly after the pandemic hit in March, as many of you know, the Memorial Church building at Harvard closed, which, as you can imagine, has made music making quite a challenge. Since June, I've been living in Falls City, Nebraska, which is a very small town where I'm currently residing. I've been grateful for a relationship with First Plymouth Church, UCC in Lincoln, Nebraska, where my high school organ teacher, Tom Trenny, works as the director of music. They've allowed me to come to record organ music in their sanctuary when time allows in their building calendar. So I usually go about twice a week. It's a 4-hour round trip drive, but a commute I've enjoyed because it's just given me a lot of time to think and to reflect. I think for so many of us isolated from our normal ways of doing things, so for creative folks who are used to making music within the physical presence of others, there is something that has been lost. There is an energy that we feel when we are making music with others that virtual choir, Zoom, etc. just can't replace. It has been difficult learning to play organ to an empty room for a recording device. I've done this recording for over 100 different organ pieces in the last year, but I think, as it has been for many of us in this time, an opportunity for self-evaluation, learning and rethinking why we have done what we have done in our own practices of daily life. I learned that for many of us in the arts, with constant deadlines of producing, that sometimes our creation of art, whether we are decorating space with visual art or decorating time with music or whatever art form, the busyness of the world easily lends itself to allowing our creating to feel transactional. I know myself, it's easy to start feeling like we're simply meeting deadlines and we burn out. We lose a sense of creating with the engagement of creating with the soul. So for the first time, I had the time and the space to ask myself some of the following questions. Why am I creating what I am creating? For what purpose? For whom? Does this make me happy? How can I find ways not to be a slave to production when playing to a recorder in an empty room without the physical presence of other people? And then I thought about the spiritual practice of praying through music. So as we've all heard this quote many times, St. Augustine says, to sing is to pray twice. Last May, my grandfather passed, and up until his very last days, he would play Bach's Prelude in C, the first piece from the Well-Tempered Clavier of J.S. Bach. He would play this in the mornings, and I remember one morning I asked him why he would choose that piece, and he said, I use this piece to pray. This pandemic time forced me to slow down in the summer and to ask questions about the music that I'm making and to take time to be thoughtful about my choices and also to make a space for making music for no one other than myself and for God. Praying through music to me has been a game changer because it is dedicated time that I spend with God. Sometimes I think concerns on my mind and offer to God as I'm practicing or physically playing a keyboard instrument or violin or something. And many of my prayerful offerings are full of wrong notes. So just going to put that out there. Sometimes it's singing hymns in the car. Sometimes it's humming songs of hope while doing laundry. Sometimes it's listening to recordings of psalm chants with nothing else but a lit candle in a dark room. It may be recording a piece of music in an empty church, which was what I'm doing about twice a week. So to share these recordings with wider faith communities, I've put all of the recordings I've made since the pandemic started on a YouTube channel online. This has been a time, as you know, when churches have needed to band together to share recorded media for online services. And it has been an important time for this working together as an even larger faith community. But in sharing recordings and creating art in general, it's been important for me myself to keep in mind that even if no one listens, if no one even likes the recordings that I'm making, that it really doesn't matter because these creations were and are simply sustaining practices for God and for myself. And as with the practice of meditation, the point is the process and the practice. So as I mentioned, this has been a time for me to get creative. And I'm thinking about how musicians can also work with visual artists, with dancers, videographers, photographers, etc. And I'd like to end my portion of talking today by screen sharing a piece I decided to record when we were having these negative 30 degree below zero wind chill temperatures in the Midwest. I was feeling awfully chilled to the bone and I needed something happy and exuberant to learn and to play. And as I was practicing this piece on the piano that I'll share with you, before recording it on the organ, I thought to myself, wow, this piece really feels like flying. So I began to wonder what it would be like if I was a bird overlooking God's beautiful creation. So I actually partnered with a friend, a videographer who created this incredible video footage, and I asked if I could put as the audio to the video of my organ playing. So I'm going to share this last minute of this piece, and this is Marcel Lonquetti, French composer's Toccata in D major, with some beautiful video footage. All right, can everybody see this okay? Awesome. Hopefully you can hear it too. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, David. That was so lovely. Also, I'll just say that I had actually never seen anyone play the organ in person. I've still never seen it, but I watched a video of David playing the organ, and it is so cool. So I encourage you to check out David's YouTube page. It's some great stuff. Thanks for that presentation, David. That was so lovely. I'll pass it over now to David Holland.
Thank you. Thanks to Rabbi Jen and to Rachel for convening this space and for allowing me to be a part of it today. It's a real honor and a special treat to hear David Von Behrens playing and to see those images match with that powerful music. Actually, one of the images is from a place not far from where I grew up. So a moment of nostalgia for me as well, and a special moment of connection. Thank you very much. I'm at a disadvantage here. Unlike David Von Behren, I'm not a professional musician and can't claim the artistic authority that he has invoked so meaningfully and beautifully here. But I am a lover of music, and I am also a historian, and so I'd like to relate my sustaining practices musically to something that I do as a scholar as well. Let me start with just a couple of reference points for you. In my own religious tradition, which is at the heart of my own spiritual practices, there is a scriptural passage in which a woman by the name of Emma Smith receives counsel from the Lord. And she's actually instructed to compile a book of music. And this book of music is designed to help her community, the Latter-day Saints, through a particularly difficult time in their history. And there's one phrase in this exchange between Emma and the Lord that sticks out to me. In it, God says to her, "The song of the heart delights my soul, yea, the song of the righteous is a prayer unto me," which very much corresponds to what David was saying about music as prayer. It's embedded in a sacred scriptural tradition that I hold dear, and that verse, that passage has been meaningful to me over the years. I contrast that moment, a sort of transcendent moment between a woman and her God, with music as the connecting link, with a very personal encounter I had with my own mother after the passing of her father. We were sitting one evening talking about the sense of loss and mourning, and she began to weep, and my father was there and consoling her, and she didn't seem too interested in being consoled, and she said, "You don't understand. He's the one who used to sing to me at night." And to reflect on that bond between her and her father as the source of music in her childhood, as the one who provided songs of comfort in the dark of the night, and that's what was on her mind as she said goodbye to him at the time of his passing. Now, what's interesting to me about these two stories, the example of a human being connecting with the transcendent through the power of music, and two human beings connecting at the level of the very human through music, that it's the same medium with both vertical connective power and lateral connective power. And I actually think that that combination is a solution, or is at least a kind of antidote to the crisis, not only of a pandemic, but the crisis of modernity. Now, I'm a historian by training. That's my scholarly identity. And I particularly work on the late 18th and early 19th centuries, this period that we often describe as sort of the birth moment of what we call modernity. And one of the major intellectual and conceptual problems of that period is that it's the rise of a kind of scientific particularity, where people were looking very, very closely, very empirically at specific incidents and evidences. And history was broken up into little segments, and people stopped thinking about humanity as a common whole and started to think about it in terms of, national and historical and cultural particularities. was also the period in which people were looking for large unifying principles. We think about the Declaration of Independence, these grandiose declarations of what binds humanity together. And these two things were constantly at tension with each other. Are we beings that are oriented toward the transcendent, the universal, the connective? Or are we people living particular lives in particular places, in particular contexts in which we're often divided and disconnected from one another? And I believe much of the quest of modernity has been the effort to reconcile these things. What binds us as humans, what makes us different in our uniqueness, and can the unity and the diversity ever coincide? And for me, that's one of the reasons why the power of music is so profound in both its personal nature and its universal resonance. So when I think about, the act of singing a song, David's spoken about singing in the car. I do that all the time. I actually start my day with singing on a regular basis. When I wake up in the morning, my mind tends to race. I immediately begin to think of the challenges that will confront me that day and the issues that I need to address and the schedule that I need to keep. But I also like to spend time in prayer and devotion and contemplation. And in order to transition from that headspace about the kind of anxiety about the awaiting demands of my day, but I also want to start my day with a moment of quiet reflection and contemplation. I can't get from A to B, I can't get from here to there any more effectively than I do when offering a song. So I'll often be the first one up in my home, head downstairs and just quietly sing to myself, usually a sacred hymn, for the sake of that transition. And it is invariably effective, I have to say, more effective than just about anything that I know. And I think it's effective in part because it is both a prayer for the transcendent and it is an expression out into the world. It's not the search for transcendence as an escape from the world. It is actually the search of transcendence through the engagement with the world, the use of my voice, a sound that can be heard by others, an ability to convey a thought to a fellow human being, but also an expression that I believe is heard in the heavens. And there are very few things that qualify as the connective tissue between those two realms. And song does it as well as anything that I know. I might just use the personal, very meaningful example of my own daughter, who's a gifted musician, much more gifted, naturally talented than I am. And it's one of the many attributes of my daughter that I admire a great deal. She's been home with us through a pandemic year. She's college aged, but through a series of illness and pandemic, she's been with us, which has been a sweet, sweet time in her life, in our life, to have her under our roof in her early adulthood. But I'm often up in my room doing my Zoom work, or down in the basement doing my Zoom work, and she's playing the piano, and I can hear her writing music, figuring out chords, figuring out progressions, putting lyrics to the songs. And in the background of my life, I see somebody that I admire using music as a way to move through her world with grace and goodness. And I know those songs are both an expression to the world around her and an expression to a higher realm. And it's been one of the great blessings of my life to hear somebody who's actually got some talent at this, working through the process of creation, even in a difficult time. So I would just suggest, as part of my own sustaining practice, both the verbalization of song as a way to connect above and around the people that I care about, and the beauty of being in the presence of others who create and allowing them the space to create, that our own lives might be elevated and ennobled by their acts of creation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David and David. So at this point, I would love to open up the space to any questions, reflections, input from our participants.
Maybe I can pose a question to my counterpart here, David. Is there anything about the context of the pandemic or the isolation that you feel has affected your performance? Do you play differently? Does it put you in a different performative space? I think artists are often deeply affected. They're often deeply sensitive to their context and environment. I'm just wondering, as a professional musician, how that's affected you.
That's such a wonderful question. Yeah, I know myself personally, I, found myself with a lot of time to learn music that I had not had the option of just choosing to learn. And when everything kind of erupted last March, as it did, there's a piece by Julius Roipka, who was a student of Franz Liszt. And he died quite young, in his early 20s. He passed away, but right after completing this piece. And he wrote a sonata on the 94th Psalm. And it's really quite a fire and brimstone psalm, and he wrote it in the style of a tone poem, more or less. And so it's very, very programmatic. It's about 20 some minutes long. But it, when all of this happened, that was kind of my way of, I think, dealing and grappling with the situation around me, was just pouring myself into learning this piece that I'd wanted to learn for quite some time. I actually have a question to pose back to you as you're talking about hymns that you'll sing as part of, your transitioning into your day. Do you find that you wake up with a hymn tune or a text, or is it just something that, that you kind of have on your mind from a day previous? How do you make the decision of what tune you're going to sing?
So I tend to cycle through songs. I'll go through periods where I'll repeat the same song day after day, and then something will prompt a transition. One of the songs is quite well known in the Christian tradition is "Lead Kindly Light." It's the one I'm currently singing, which has a very interesting provenance. Cardinal Newman, he's transitioning from Anglicanism to Catholicism, facing difficulty, a moment of his own crisis of faith and identity, and pens the words to that song. And so it's always one of great meaning to me. But I sort of cycle through them, which means they're sort of embedded in my mind as a result, both of sort of the initial impetus to turn to that song, but also because I'm, repetitively using it as an expression of hope and grounding and centering. I noticed that in the chat there was a question from Scott Williamson, which I appreciate, about choral singing. What does it mean to sing with other people? Which is a concept actually I've thought about a lot. One of the beautiful elements of a choir is that it has the effect of collectively getting us closer to the right note than I tend to individually. Just the law of averages, right? Everybody's approximating the right note, and if you have enough people there, then the cumulative effect usually gets pretty close to that note. The bigger the choir, the closer you get by law of average, which for me is kind of a beautiful symbol, right? We all bring our own pitch and tone, but when we're together, we have a tendency to be better than the sum of the parts, and that the collective voice draws us closer to that desired note than we can achieve in isolation, at least than I can achieve in isolation. And so I do appreciate the communal nature of choral singing and the way in which it compensates for my individual limitations. And that for me is kind of a symbol of the power of community.
Sheldon, I just want to say I really appreciate your comment in the chat, and if it's all right, I might read it out loud. Sheldon writes, just co-signing on the difficulty transitioning into creating music in isolation. So much of what I get from choral music is directly connected to the fellowship of the practice and the connection that results from rendering pieces together. I really echo those sentiments. And I think too, that's one thing I know I miss about being with the U Choir is just that time and that fellowship. And I spoke a little bit about just that physical presence of being together, and yeah, like in isolation too. I'm finding that the pieces that I tend to sing that are choral pieces are conjuring up the memories and these times of singing with others, and singing those voice parts maybe I didn't quite ever learn quite right, or singing the parts that I never could really reach, the soprano parts, but doing my best to do it in the confines of my car when nobody can hear me, or in the shower.
Thank you both again for coming and sharing, and thank you all for coming and sharing this time with us. As some of you know, I'm also a longtime musician, choir singer for my whole life, and music is so healing and so connective. And I hope it's soon, and really look forward to the day when we can rejoin our choirs and be together and make music again. And in the meantime, it's really beautiful to hear both of your thoughts and experiences, and to have y'all share these practices with us. So thank you so much.